you all for being here tonight. If you would subscribe if you haven't already, that would be fantastic. Give a thumbs up and comment if you want. All of that does so much to help the channel. So let's just begin. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. We lived in a rough neighborhood, Decatur, Georgia. I would wake up outside in the middle of the night, not knowing how I got there. Would have to walk home and walk into the darkened doorway I had left wide open for whoever might be lurking around. However, the time that scared me the absolute most, I was about 9 years old. I woke up and found myself with the bedroom curtains drawn back and staring out the window. As I came awake, I noticed a very large and completely hairless man, no hair, eyebrows, nothing, staring at me, and slowly inching closer to the window and closer to my face. He was looking bewildered, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what was going on, and I started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place and peeing down my leg. The man freaked out, screamed, did a tumbling move, and ran off in a weird zigzag like he was trying to dodge bullets. My mom woke up and thought I probably had a nightmare. The next morning, we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the door jamb and door handle. The 1990 earthquake in the Philippines. I remember this. After the main quake, my dad and I walked the streets to get home, and he shielded me from large colored bags lined up on the ground. He later explained all those were dead bodies. Wow. I was active duty in the Navy, served abroad. A submarine. We were in port one day. Most of the crew had left. The guys on duty for the night, that was us, were given permission to bring our kids on board for dinner. Halfway through the meal, someone makes a 4MC announcement. 4MC is the emergency announcement intercom. It says that there's light smoke in the engine room, quickly followed by fire in the engine room. We train for this stuff. But the thing is that since we do, everyone took it immediate action. Commanding officer is still there, but topside, one of our senior enlisted guys apparently ran the kids up front to a hatch where he was, quite literally throwing them through the hatch as our CO caught them and set them on the deck topside. The rest of us ran towards the fire, and I see no one grabbing a mask. Not one person. So I grabbed a handful of breathing masks and followed the hatch, where we were greeted by what appeared to be a light smoke filling the entire engine room. But oddly, it did not smell like smoke. It was sweet, tasted sweet. An oil pump had blown and filled the entire back half of the boat with atomized hydraulic fluid. A guy was moments from lighting a torch in the engine room as a casualty was called. Had it been called just a moment later, we'd have walked into an inferno. Had he for some reason not heard it called and lit the torch after we had run in, we would have been on fire before we could react. This all turned out perfectly fine. Cleaned the oil that clung to the surface services and fixed the pump. But it was somewhat surreal, understanding just how close we were to a wildly different result. I was home alone when I was 11. I had just fallen asleep and someone tried to break in the front door. I called 911 and hid in the pantry room. Bottom shelf. They came into the door next to the pantry and tried to break into that door too. Luckily, the police got there and one of them picked me up, held me until my mom got there. I wouldn't let go and made sure I felt safe. I'm 27 and have not stayed home alone much since. I would imagine that would affect you quite seriously. The day I signed a lease for my first apartment, I got a dog so I wouldn't be alone. It's pretty traumatizing when you're that young. At least you knew to call 911 and hide. I was home alone. Thankfully, my kids were not home when my now ex-husband's drug dealer came by. He busted in the door, screaming at the top of his lungs he was gonna F us all up. I was hiding in my wall in the closet under blankets on the phone with 911. He got so close a few times. I have never been so petrified in my entire life. The cops came very quickly and he ran off. They got him just a few streets over. I've always parked in certain spots at my last job for 12 years that I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day my spot taken by a dark tinted caddy and I'm immediately pissed because everyone knows it's my spot. It's morning shift, 4 a.m. So it can't be one of the others because I know what they drive. Maybe a newbie, or maybe another employee from another shop in the plaza. It's still there at my lunch break, and when I go home the next day, I come in at 1 p.m. to close around 9:30. And then also the next. Something about it really literally bothered me. It smelled wrong, literally all this south and high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine, then a police officer. He said if you feel something is wrong, then it probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by it, it really was nagging at me. I was stuck waiting for over an hour before anyone showed up, and honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, I would have been like, screw it, but I waited, mostly because I can really be a petty SOB. That's my spot. The police showed up all annoyed because who knows how many they can't park there. Calls they get. They run the license plate though and things go crazy. They want my info, want me to contact my manager. Does this lot have cameras? Have I touched the car, etc.? So apparently the car is on Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they pop the trunk, they find her dead, mutilated body under a blanket, and that was the source of the smell. She had gone out with her much older, controlling and insecure boyfriend, but had decided to get out of the relationship. She only made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after torturing her, stuffing her in there, and who knows what else. Then parked and walked away, left her to die. possibly helping perform, but somebody who is going to go to that lengths and torture somebody, driving her 3 counties over from where she lived, and then parking her in a secluded parking lot is not going to leave her alive. When I was 15, I got into a bad situation with an almost 30-year-old man. I decided just before my 17th birthday I had to get out. I thought this was going to happen to me. I was going to be found dead in a car. Honestly, I feel so lucky to be alive. Was with a guy for a couple of years when I realized that he'd taken up smoking meth as a hobby after work. We had numerous problems already and had 3 small kids. Finally, I had the balls to kick him out. A few days later, maybe a week, he makes a fake Facebook page and sends me a friend request. The only posts on the page were talking about killing me and my children, his suicide, and how he planned to do it that day. The most recent post was accompanied by a selfie of him in my backyard. A recent selfie. He had been there. I was on my way home with the kids late in the evening when I got the request. I had stopped by my parents' home the day before and gotten my dad's 9mm handgun because he was sending messages through mutual friends about burning my house down. I called the police as soon as I got home, and they didn't seem to think it was a big deal, and I didn't have an officer available to come check my house before we walk into it. I live in the middle of the woods, and we have a rinky-dink police force. Anyway, I got out. I made the kids stay in the car. I gave my oldest instructions on what to do if anything happened. I had to sweep my own home in the dark with a 9mm in case he was there, waiting for me and my children. And let me tell you something, it was terrifying. I had to check my entire house every time we came home for a while. I was always worried I'd eventually find him there. I called the police numerous times. I was eventually granted a restraining order a couple weeks later when the death threats continued. He died about a year ago, and all I felt was relief. Oh man, that is horrible when you get into a relationship with somebody and then find out after you have quite a few commitments with them that they have a drug problem or have begun a drug problem or drinking or whatever. I don't wish that upon anybody. you going to do to help that person? I'm not a doctor. A few years ago, when I still lived at home with my mom in Philly, someone tried breaking into our house. I looked through the window next to the door and saw two men wearing ski masks staring back at me with some type of pipe or tool, and the other guy with a gun pointed right at me. I bolted away from the door and got my dad's 10 gauge and stood in the bathroom door as I called 911. They ended up running and were caught down the road by the police. They had multiple warrants, each for break-ins in Maryland and Delaware, one of which left a father of two shot in the spine and paralyzed. I'm still thankful to this day it wasn't armed. I wasn't armed during that. Can you imagine looking out your window and seeing two guys in a ski mask, one with a gun and another with a pipe? Like a big drain pipe, I'm assuming, or something that was horrific. Oh my gosh. I have cerebral palsy, but I've always worked while at and after leaving college, sometimes having 2 or 3 jobs at a time. When this incident happened, I was 22, renting my bungalow and living alone, going to work. As I'm a full-time wheelchair user, I had to use a cab to travel to and from work. And although most of the guys driving the cab firm were solid and really nice, there were a few dodgy ones, as in most walks of life. I could transfer quite easily, so all the driver had to do was hold my wheelchair steady and fold it up, and then put it in the boot. On this day, this guy shows up at 8:30 a.m., which was late. I proceeded to transfer from my wheelchair into the taxi. I felt him right up close behind me, his hand brushed gently over my back and bottom. It's worth mentioning that I had slight issues with this man before, mostly making smutty remarks and asking me out for a drink. I always said no. He got slightly nasty after that, and I ended up having to report him to the firm. As I am disabled, there wasn't much I could do, as I was holding myself up and I could not let go of the door. I swore at him, managing to swing around to sit in the car, and told him never to do that again. He laughed and smirked. We started to drive. 10 minutes in, I noticed we weren't going the regular route to get to the center where I worked. Now I'm furious, and also the fact that I was already late for work. I asked him, "What is the deal?" He ignored my questions and said in a cold voice, "You know I live around here. I could take you to my flat where there are my 3 mates, and there wouldn't be anything you could do about it." When he said this, my stomach started cramping in knots. But I said in my bravest voice, "If I'm much later, work will call me and they will have your firm's details too." With that, he scowled at me big time, and after a while, I soon recognized the usual route to work. When I arrived at work, my boss was worried. He saw the driver, who he didn't have time for either, asked me if I was okay. After a while, I was able to tell my supervisor what had happened. And she first called the cab firm and then the police, who came to interview me at work and then to talk to the man. I do not know what happened to him, but I never saw him again. That is makes me so angry because they're just cowards. Late 80s, early 90s in Northern Ireland. I was a kid, around 7 or 8. The sun was shining and it was time. In the early afternoon, my dad needed to return a library book in the Crumlin Road, a Protestant loyalist area in Belfast. We were Catholics and the Crumlin Road was notoriously dangerous at the time. Yes, I know this very well. I have a very good friend whose family moved back to the United States from Ireland when I was in high school because of all of the fighting and how dangerous it was. So, and it still is to a lesser extent, but it still is dangerous. I was already a little on edge, just knowing the reputation of the place. My dad seemed cool though, didn't really seem worried about anything. It's not like we have Catholic printed on our foreheads. However, he did say that I had to pretend I have a different name if anyone asks me. My name is one which marks you as a Catholic, so I adopted a Protestant name for the trip. We came to a road which led to an intersection across which was a predominantly Catholic Republican enclave called the Ardorney Road. We were headed to the right, I'm sorry if I butchered that, down a long, winding path, but further up the road ahead, towards the intersection, we could see a group of men. One of them was running back and forth across the road, relaying information between two pockets of people. Some were staring across the road towards the Catholic area. Some were talking to a man in a parked out running car. One in particular stuck out. He had long hair and a leather jacket. He's very tall, at least compared to the other men. It all looked suspicious, even to me as a child. Although I didn't know why, my dad's demeanor changed to a more serious and quiet one, and I took it as confirmation that we were not safe. He was from Belfast. We were living in a town outside Belfast at the time, and he grew up when things were at their absolute worst. So he knew the ropes. He knew the signs that something was happening. We weren't walking towards the men, so it wasn't a problem. We crossed to the right and started walking away. This is when a woman approached us. She was middle-aged with short red hair. She saw us coming and made a purposeful beeline towards us. She seemed preoccupied, nervous. She started grilling my dad immediately, asking who he was, where he was coming from. She was talking in a I'm trying my best to sound casual, but I'm failing manner. I could feel my entire body beginning to boil with fear, and I felt as though I was mere moments away from being discovered, quote unquote. It was like a horror movie where someone finds themselves in a small town where everyone is in a cult or something and they're trying to blend in but are drawing suspicion, then are losing themselves in an ever-increasing paranoia. I suddenly had visions of my dad getting shot and me screaming over his corpse, maybe even getting shot myself despite being a child. The longer my dad and the woman talked, the more I was starting to lose the ability to hear. As though my head was underwater, I was holding my dad's hand and I was struggling to keep a grip because in serious danger. It was clear that she was part of whatever was going on around the corner and was trying to manage and analyze the flow of foot traffic, especially that of strangers like us, given that she and us were the only people on the street. She obviously had been doing a good job. She was fishing hard for information about us. My dad had played it cool and responded to her questions without really revealing much, doing a better job of being casual than she was. The area where we were from, explained, was mixed, Protestant and Catholic, and he feigned his pleasure at the fact, trying to signal that he hated Catholics and was somewhat miffed to have to live amongst them, without ever actually using those words. It was subtle. I was terrified that I might need to participate in the conversation, because there's no way I could dance around the truth as well as my dad was doing. He explained that he was here just to return her book to the library, but he showed her as proof. She asked about me, my name, and I gave her the fake name. She surely read the terror in my face, and I could hear it in my voice. My dad decided that was a time to break off and say, "Nice to meet you, all the best," and started walking away with me. I could sense that the woman didn't budge and just stood and stared at us while we walked away. I glanced over my shoulder about 30 seconds and just got a glimpse of her turning and walking towards the road where the men were gathered. We rounded a corner and were now at the top of a very long and steep road path with the library at the very bottom of it. The path was fenced on one side with the library at the very bottom, and we were walking deeper into danger that we had only 2 routes of escape: keep going or turn back the way we came. About partway down the road, we realized we were being followed. My dad told me to run and check that the library was open, and I hesitated. He said it was okay and just go and check. I glanced over my shoulder. It was the man in the leather jacket with the long hair. I did what my dad instructed and ran ahead, heart pounding, ears pricking away, the crack of gunfire. I checked the door was open. I ran back up as I was always. Come back, I saw that the man in the leather jacket had turned. It was making his way back up the road. My dad looked unfazed, but he was walking with a certain rigidity, like something had happened in the time it took me to run to the library and back. Again, he hadn't quite unclenched his fist yet. He said it was okay and we were safe. I asked about the man following us. He sent me ahead, and when I was at a safe distance, he stopped and turned around to face him, ready for whatever happened. He said he experienced violence, but as he turned around, the leather jacket dude immediately put his head down, turned back, and walked the other way. My dad watched him for a few seconds and then started making his way back towards me. That afternoon, within the hour we were there, a taxi driver was murdered in the street. The vibes that something terrible was going to happen were justified, and I've never felt as terrified as I did that day. When the news of the taxi driver was on TV that night, I knew I had seen the planning of a murder. I knew we had walked away into the middle of it, right into the middle of it. I could probably have identified both the woman and the leather man had I been asked about them by the police, but that was never going to happen. No way my dad would have volunteered himself and me to the cops to be a witness against a terrorist cell. I was leaving a grocery store in Vermont back in 1999. I passed a young couple, maybe in their late 20s, with a toddler and a baby. They were screaming, yelling at each other so loudly, but I chose to mind my own business. The arguing stops as she starts to leave. I dismiss it and start to drive away when I heard 4 to 5 guns my motorcycle on the highway going through a major city. I was still pretty nervous about riding on busier highways since I was still a pretty new driver of a motorcycle. I was in one of the middle lanes when about 250 foot in front of me, an 18-wheeler kicked up a plywood panel that was in the road in my lane. It flipped around, making it look like I was going to run into it like a wall. I did not have enough time to brake or move a lane since I was surrounded by other vehicles. Luckily, another 18-wheeler passed by it, causing it to rotate perpendicular, making it barely graze my elbow as I passed by it. I don't think I moved a muscle for a quarter mile in shock that I survived that. I'm a rider. My husband is the driver usually, and nothing super scary has happened to me when I go out with him, but I'm really conscious of riders even more than I used to be because in my head they're now all my husband. When I first learned that some of the nicest people out there can be dealing with some terrible demons, when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I had a math tutor at the time. She was my mom's friend from AA, didn't really understand it all at the time, obviously. I knew she was a really nice lady, and the reason I'm so good with math, even to this day. One of the days she was supposed to come over, my mother couldn't get a hold of her. So my mother got concerned. We took a ride over to check on her to see if she was okay. We got to her place, found her so drunk, lying on the floor, and couldn't even stand. My mom called an ambulance. Later that day, my mom had to explain to me what happened, and she had passed away. Taught me that day, no matter how good things look on the outside for some people, the demons on the inside could just be moments away from taking them. Wow. I'm in my city. There is a canal. There are several bridges crossing it, one being a smaller, openable metal bridge for bikes and pedestrians. It's kind of like a skeleton of iron bars with a wooden path in the middle. That said, there are lots of large gaps in it. When I was young, I don't remember exact age, but under 10, I was biking with my parents and the siblings along the canal. I was about to cross that bridge. Me and my brother went first, a little too close to each other, resulting in us colliding and falling to the side on our bikes. My brother fell in the path, but I was too close to the edge and went out through one of those gaps. The bridge itself was just like a meter over the water, and this was just in the edge of it, but I remember losing control, splashing into the cold, dark water, fighting for dear life. I was a kid. I couldn't swim. Somehow I was able to grab one of the metal bars slightly, at which I held on to. Panic. That's the only way I can describe how I felt. All this happened in a couple seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Suddenly I heard a splash and felt my dad beside me in the water lifting me up. And that was it. A year ago I was hospitalized with an infection in my right lower leg. They drew a line a few inches below my knee and said if the infection spreads past this line, I'll lose my leg below the knee. They pumped me full of antibiotics and it seemed to work. I had to finish my antibiotics regimen at a nearby rehab hospital. The day before I was transferred, my roommate and I were eating breakfast. He was an older gentleman, and when he slept, he made a weird was still during COVID. I was about to call a nurse when one ran in asking if he was okay. The guy was coding. All of a sudden, our room had nurses and doctors running to save this guy. It was controlled chaos, procedures and medicines being used, being called out. One nurse kept going to the window. They kept pushing me closer to the window so more people could help him. They worked on him for over an hour. They called the time of death shortly afterwards. The doctor asked for a moment of silence. He said, he saw me sitting up in bed and came over and asked if I was alright. I said I was, even though I had tears in my eyes. All the other nurses kept asking if I needed anything. These people took time out to see if I was okay after what I witnessed, which was actually very rare. That was whatever hospital you were at, continued to go. I asked one of the nurses to open the window a bit. She smiled and understood what I meant. It was a sunny day and very peaceful outside. Even now, typing this out a year later, it brings me to tears. I heard someone's final words on this earth. Excuse me, miss, but my breakfast was supposed to come with 2 coffees. When I was 8 or 9, my friend Brian spent the night. I get up to use the bathroom and find him in the bathroom floor having a seizure. I wake my mom up and she calls 911. Turns out he has epilepsy and has been having seizures for a while but didn't tell anybody because his parents couldn't afford to take him to the doctor. I hope he gets the help he needs. Went to therapy with my first husband. He went on about I was a bad wife. When it was my turn, I just said I would like him to stop hitting me, dragging me across the floor. He wasn't happy. The therapist asked me to attend the next session alone. Husband wanted to know what I told the therapist. I can't even remember what I said. When we got home, he took my keys, paper, pager, glasses, and tried to lock me in the bedroom. He also cut off the landline. It took 2 tries, but I finally escaped with what I could fit in my car. You know, this was 20 years ago, and I still have nightmares. He constantly told me if I left him, he would kill me. See, I was 14 when we started dating. He was in his mid-20s, and a friend of my dad's. Wow, what in the world? You know, abuse isn't something that they start off doing. I always tell my daughter that somebody who's abusive or gets into an abusive relationship, it is kind of like a sheep will never be a wolf, and a wolf will never be a sheep. But they can pretend. Wolf in sheep's clothing is the best saying in the world, because they're so nice and they treat you so well until they have you, and then their true colors show through. So I have many stories of how my friends have been in wonderful relationships, and then as soon as they either have a child with that person or they start dating them more seriously or get married, it completely changes. I was 17 when my mom's husband had this mental breakdown and plotted attempted to kill her. I was recovering from knee surgery at the time, but still ran from my room to see what was going on. My baby brother at the time, who was 4, was in the room when he was joking and stomping on her. I had took him out of the room and told my other siblings to leave the house and get someone to call the police. I had to tackle this man to get him off her, and it pinned him up against the washer and dryer. I yelled at her to leave. I had to try to push him, pushed me, and went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. He was trying to hurt himself because in the small time frame I had called the police. While on the phone, he looked me in the eyes and started to cut himself and lock himself in the bathroom, since he figured he would be arrested if he was gone. What scared me the most was how calm he was when he said, "She's cheating on me, so if I can't have her, no one else will." I was screaming at him. I have no idea how I got him off her because he was 6'3" and 300-something pounds. I'm 21 now, and to this day I get jumpy around knives and panic when I don't hear from my mom after she leaves the house. True and creepy. Here we go. About 8 years ago, when my friends lived in an old 2-story house that had been converted into 3 apartment buildings. 1 on the top floor, 2 on the bottom. At the time, my friend and his girlfriend visiting from out of town were the only tenants. The other bottom floor apartment was being used for storage by the landlord, and the apartment on top was empty. Though we knew 2 people who had lived in that upper apartment pretty recently, as the only occupant of my friend had made himself a home and managed to explore the entire house at various times. One day he realized a door on the side of the house didn't really make sense considering the layout and the rest of the rooms. Oddly, the door was padlocked and a few feet off the ground with no steps leading up to it. For whatever reason, he decided to bust open the padlock. Never do this, please. Gosh. And he wanted to see what was beyond the door. When he did, he found a narrow room the size of a closet that was tall enough to extend both sides. Both sides. Of the house with a ladder in it. So I climbed up the ladder with a flashlight, and on the 2nd story found a very tiny room filled with crumpled Burger King napkins, a baby oil bottle, and a baby monitor. What? The room had a tiny window that looked directly at the toilet of the upstairs apartment, and the mirror attached to the bathroom wall was positioned so you could also see the shower. This was an apartment a few of our friends had lived in. Wonder how could no one notice this before, because that is a weird layout. I mean, for sure I would have, it would have piqued my curiosity. Absolutely. I'm too nosy. The room had a tiny window that looked directly at the toilet. I mean, seriously. This one looked into both his bathroom and the bedroom of the unit that the landlord was using for storage, littered with Burger King cups. What? I mean, so what happened? My friend was already planning on moving out in a couple months, so he painted over the window in his bathroom and stopped paying rent. Right before he moved out, he called the cops and showed them everything. At the time, he was debating suing the landlord, but I think at the time he didn't want something as weird and creepy as that situation to become a major event or affect his life. I understand that. Also, he never really found out if the landlord ended up in legal trouble over it. Hopefully, the cops at least put some fear in him and got him to cut out that kind of stuff in the future. Wow. That is really disturbing. You've got to check out where you live. Seriously. So I'm really digging deep into Reddit here. That was 15 years ago. No, but I mean, there's true, and then there's not true. So don't forget, I have a Reddit page now that you can upload videos to. You can write stories, and all of the stories you write are usable by anybody. Please just use it to share, recommend, and be creative. I just feel like so many Reddit threads don't allow you to share your stuff, but that's what makes it great, right? That's why these aren't professional writers, right? Your true stories are so cool to read, and also for us that have had really unsettling experiences, some sort of peace of mind position again. You know, and I'm not, underplaying being homeless whatsoever, but sometimes when we go through situations like this, it really makes us appreciate what we have, and it is our choices that make us eventually pull through. Now, some may disagree with me. I mean, obviously, drug addicts and are gonna have a lot harder time finding a stable place, but they don't want to be stable. At least that's how it has always been in Florida. I can't even tell you how many people I've taken in and tried to help. And the old saying is, no good deed goes unpunished, and I'll tell you, I hate to say it, but every time I would help somebody, something horrific would happen, and it just got too much. I was rushing to a lab class, had books in one hand, lunch in the other, and attempted to walk downstairs into the lab. Except the steps were old cement steps with metal lips. The tip of my foot caught the lip. I went head first and never touched anything the entire way down until I landed on my neck against the wall at the bottom of the stairs. I felt my entire weight load into my neck, and every single vertebrae popped. I knew I was dead. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Everyone rushed out of the lab to see what happened. Apparently it was loud. I was 300 pounds at the time, and then all got the sudden. All of a sudden, the breath rushed back into my lungs, and I could breathe, and I could move. I got up. I felt miraculous. Ended up with the occasional severe back pain that eventually went away after 18 months. Holy, that's a miracle. That is a true miracle. When you land on your cervical spine and are able, at 300 pounds, and could hear every vertebrae pop, and you're able to get up. Holy crap. That's like a medical miracle, seriously. Wow. I'm so thankful for that man being okay. I cannot remember how old I was, but definitely not older than 10. Younger than 8. But I'm still traumatized from it. As a black man growing up in the 50s to the 60s, Dad suffered a lot of abuse, both at home and outside of it. He ended up joining the Vietnam War at the very end, fresh out of high school. Because of this, he developed a heavy drinking and drug problem that I wasn't fully aware of as a child. As you can probably guess, this led him to being abusive himself, mostly towards my mom. I don't remember a lot of my childhood because I blacked a lot of it out. But there's only a couple of nights I will never, ever forget. So a little bit more backstory. I was and am the youngest sibling and was named after him before changing it myself, so I didn't really endure a lot of the physical abuse for the most part, and I was always quiet, just trying to stay out of his way. 60s or 70s was trying to talk him down, but it was like nothing was getting to him. Eventually, my dad walked out the door and my mom sat us all on the couch and just held us while we cried, thinking it was finally over. Until my dad came back and started pouring some liquid all over us. It was gasoline, and he didn't even realize it until he poured a line outside the door and started trying to light it with a lighter that I'm still thankful never worked. My sister ran out the back door to another of my dad's siblings that lived a couple blocks away. My uncle was able to stop him from trying to burn us alive, and when he came back in, I just remember grabbing him by the waist, begging him to stop, saying I had gas in my eyes. Oh my god, this is heartbreaking. I think at that point it broke him out of whatever came over him because he just began apologizing, checking to see if I was hurt. Then he ran off. The thing is, though, the worst part, the worst part, of this isn't that my mom didn't press charges, or that he was only in jail over the weekend. It is the fact he doesn't remember any of it. Why? I think about it almost every day, and that sucks. I do still have a relationship with my father, albeit strained. He is completely sober now and an amazing grandparent to my siblings, who he sees every day, although he's part of the reason I don't think I could ever have kids. That's horrific. I'm so sorry that you had to experience all of that. My best friend growing up had an aunt that was the sweetest woman, like your stereotypical devout Christian, that just wanted to be nice to everyone and do nice things for people. Volunteered to help the homeless when she wasn't working in the office at her church. Every weekend she would give me and my friend $5 each to pick up cigarette butts on the block, and then she'd also feed us and give us candy. Just one of the best people you could know, and genuinely so. She started dating a man from her church that was attracted to how beautiful she was on the inside as she was on the outside. But after a few months in, he decided that her showing kindness towards other people, especially men, was a sign she was cheating on him. The same kindness she'd always shown everybody, and the reason he claimed to have fallen for her in the first place. So how does this obviously reasonable man react? Well, he waited outside of her house for her to get home from work one day friend and his new friend said we should go out to the rope swing in the woods nearby. We hiked back on this little trail and found this rope swing, which was just a long rope with a piece of wood tied to the end. It looked like if you used it, you would swing out pretty far over the steep, wooded hillside. They asked who wanted to try it, and normally I would take risks and do things like that, but it just seemed dangerous even for me. I said I might go, but I would not be the first. My new friend said he would go on the rope swing. Still to this day, I don't know if they were familiar with using it in the past or not, or if he was just trying to be cool and impress us. He swung way out in the apex of his swing. One hand slipped off and the wood handled in the other. For a split second I thought, oh cool, there's a safe place to land, and he meant to do it. There was no safe landing. He made impact on a fallen tree and pitched forward and slid several feet on some rocks. He was dead instantly. Of course, we did not know he was dead right away. We had to make our way down there to try to help him. His lips were already blue when we got there. My dad was 9 years old. He was sitting on the wood seat and basically swung over a rock ledge. The rope broke where it attached to the tree. I swear he was frozen in space for a second, like Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner show. The rope was coming down and he fell over the ledge out of view. However, the ending is better. He fell on a big shrub or something and only tweaked his back a bit. Of course, we were all pretty freaked out. I was hugging him all night and I think I slept in their bed. He died in 2007. I have to be honest, he was the greatest dad and I miss him terribly. I had salmonella as a kid. I spent a week at home with the flu, quote unquote, before finally going to the doctor. I spent a week at the local hospital having all kinds of different medications pumped into me. Then it was a week at the children's hospital where they wanted to make sure my insides hadn't turned to goo. Fever of 104, hallucinating crickets on the wall. Another week at home with a god-awful stomach cramp as my gut tried to get used to solid foods again. So a few years later, my family moved to Ottawa. We went for a walk around the Parliament buildings for some sightseeing. My family was a little ahead of me when someone grabbed me from behind and dragged me back away from my family. I was calling for my mom, terrified, as a group of Asian tourists dragged me into the middle of them so that I could be part of their group photo. Tourists, yeah, that's what I said. They released me afterwards. My mother jokes about how she turned around and all these people were wrapped around me taking pictures. How they just wanted photos of the little blonde Canadian and that I could be in someone's brochures. Oh my goodness. So you thought we were getting kidnapped after going through all of that? Oh my gosh. I am a corrections officer, which, to be honest, is scary enough, and I'm here to say, yes, absolutely. But as a woman, I was lucky to have a very experienced and real female trainer at the academy. She told me to trust my gut always. One day, my male off-sider went to the bathroom. It's just me and about 80 male prisoners. They all went nuts, saying someone in cell 39 was having a heart attack. Now, cell 39 was on the upper landing and hard to see from outside. They were screaming at me to go up there and help. No way. I said, just wait, I need my other officer. They kept screaming, there was no time. I had to go. I was walking home from school when a car pulled up next to me, and the people asked in it if I'd like a ride home. They were a couple, and since it was a man and a woman, they seemed friendly. I felt safe getting into the car with them. When I got into the car, their demeanor quickly changed. They told me they had to go to their house really quick to pick something up first. They were whispering to each other during the ride, and I couldn't make out what they were saying. When we arrived at the house, they told me to go into the house with them. At this point, I knew something was up. Something was not right. I was afraid to say no, so I did what they said. Once we got into the house, the woman grabbed me and pushed me to the floor. She started to hold me down. I was kicking, yelling, and struggling. This made the woman so mad. She punched me in the face and told me she was going to tie a rope around me if I continued to struggle. Then she tells me I have to take my clothes off, and at this point, I'm on the verge of crying, begging her to please, please, please let me go. This woman has a nerve to tell me to stop acting like a crybaby and just do it. The guy then joins her in holding me down, and they both start taking my clothes off since I'm crying and begging them to let go. When I'm completely naked, the guy takes off his clothes, and the woman is telling me to keep my eyes shut or she'll hit me. The guy then R-words me from behind. After several minutes of this, I feel something sharp inserted in my behind, and I start to scream in pain. I open my eyes, but the woman holds my head down and threatens me again to keep my eyes closed, so I close them again. The guy finishes, and when he's done, I'm just lying on the floor bleeding, not saying or reacting to anything, while the guy puts his clothes back on and talks to the woman. They tell me to get my clothes back on, so I do as I'm told. When I'm finished with putting my clothes back on, they tell me to get back in the car. As we are walking to leave the house, the woman starts laughing. She looks to the guy and says, "Look how much his ass is bleeding." That's horrible. There was blood seeping through the back of my pants. Then she laughs again and says, "You might want to cover that up." I take my jacket off and wrap it around my waist to cover up the bleeding. Once we are in the car, they don't say anything else. After several minutes of driving, they led me off by the main road. They told me to get out. After that, they drove away. They didn't even threaten me not to say anything. They just told me to get out the car. I wandered off to a wooded area nearby. I remember how unbearable the pain was, both physically and emotionally. This is awful. I felt like I wanted to break down and cry and scream at the top of my lungs, but I couldn't. I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't cry at first, but after several minutes, I finally broke down. This is awful. What made me cry was not what happened, but the realization I had nobody I could turn to. My family was abusive at home, and I was abused both physically and mentally. I know they would blame me for getting into the car with them, so I had to keep this to myself. I had no friends at school and basically no family. Nobody could ever comfort me or help me. I was all alone. I'm still afraid of telling people in real life because I feel I will be viewed as damaged or looked down for being a male victim. I bet this happens quite a bit, especially when it's a male. The shame and, they take the blame on themselves when they are not. They are the victim. I don't know what to do, and finding out that they were ever caught or if they have other victims. I know too much time has passed, but I'm still hoping something can be done. I actually live near the border of my state when this happened, so I thought maybe a federal law enforcement was clear until I hit a patch of black ice. One of the most scariest things, in my opinion. I completely lost control of the car and sailed off the highway. I didn't know if I'd go into the woods on the other side or partially frozen Lake Superior on the other. Luckily, I went towards the woods, barrel rolled a few times, and landed on my wheels. I was in a shallow ravine, so my car was hard to see unless you were looking for it. I think it was single-digit temperatures outside. This is before the ubiquity of cell phones. There was zero signal where I crashed, so I was alone, freezing and on a desolate highway near a patch of black ice that could make someone else sail right into me. I'm not sure how long I was out there, but eventually a local found me and took me to the hospital. I somehow escaped with a few cuts and bruises from the crash, and other than being very cold, I was okay. The state police officer that was at the crash scene when we got back to my car said, by all accounts, I should have died. If not from the crash, then from being a meat popsicle, yes. I had no way of contacting my friends or my girlfriend. I was at least a 4-hour drive from home. The local that found me offered a place to stay until someone could come get me. I was there for 3 days until a friend in Duluth was able to get me. This guy's name was John, and I will never ever forget him. He died in 2018 at 70 years old. I had long since moved back to the south but kept in touch with him by email. After I crashed, I was in a place I didn't really know at night in the road that's not traveled much that late in winter, freezing. Every moment that passed without a car or semi passing by, I thought I would freeze to death. I was absolutely terrified. But then John came along and literally saved my life, and for that, I'm eternally thankful. When I was younger, I had a bunk bed. I slept at the top and my brother slept at the bottom. One summer morning, I was feeling extremely lazy. I laid in bed and had a lay-in. I stayed in bed and had a lay-in. We've all done that from time to time. I was the only one in the room. For some reason, I always slept with the door to my back, so I couldn't see who was coming in unless I sat up and turned around. On that morning, I felt someone touching me. I thought it was my little sister playing with me, so I told her to cut it out. No response. A few minutes later, told her to leave my room. No response, and my door had stayed closed this whole time. I suspect she was hiding under my bed, so I jumped down to kick her out. Oddly, no one was there. Till this day, I do not know who touched me, but whatever it was, it felt real. It had weight to it. I did ask everyone if they had come into my room that evening, but they all said no. It's been 12 years, and I still think about it. I was with my wife and kids by New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Felt pretty comfortable in the water because I grew up near there, and this is my home beach as a kid. I went around 7 a.m. to take some pictures of waves by myself. If you know New Smyrna Beach, a sandbar develops 60 yards offshore that you have to swim out to. Only about shoulder-high water, and then you get to the sandbar, which you are about waist high. I am out there taking pictures by myself, and about 8 feet by me is a big black object in the water. It was huge. I thought it was a manatee at first. Then I realized it was a bull shark checking me out. Nobody out there, no surfboard, just me and a tiny camera. faced the shark as that's what you're supposed to do, and it turned away. I then had to make the decision to swim back via sprint or slow and calm. I yelled at the beach, panic yell for my wife to watch me, and she had no idea what was going on. I did the quietest, fastest freestyle swim, 60 yards. Scariest minutes of my life. I've written about this on Reddit before. I was about 8. I was deep in the woods at my uncle's house. The parents went out, and the 5 kids, 4 through 14, stayed at home. We were playing hide and seek in the house with no lights on. There weren't street lights or anything, so you couldn't see at all. Base was in the living room, and I hid in the living room so I could quickly get to home base. My brother 11 was it. He was doing his countdown, and I was hiding just a couple of feet from him when a lightning strike drew our attention to the window. Both shocked to see the outline of a man at the window trying to see in. We whispered, and on the next lightning strike, the guy was starting to walk to the front door. My brother Ben quickly ran to lock the front door. I don't know, but it was a different time and place. We should have locked it before. And got there right before the guy started shaking the handle violently. Ben started flipping on the lights, presumably so the guy would know people were home and he'd leave. He yelled at me to lock the other doors. I ran and locked the kitchen door. Sliding glass doors at the back of the house. As I was locking that door, the guy was suddenly there. Standing there on the other side of the glass, I was frozen. But Ben calmly told me to close a curtain, and I focused on his voice and did what he said. My uncle has guns, but his son was on a hunting trip. So all we could do was find a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. Ben stepped out on the porch with it to try to make the guy believe we were armed. They constantly had phone issues. Now this is going way back. But they had a party line, and we couldn't get the phone to work to make a call. We were trying to call someone on my uncle's CB radio, but we weren't getting anyone. Eventually, an older cousin who was only 15 himself showed up, and we thought an adult was there, and we had been saved. That calmed us down, and we went back to normal, I guess. I'm not sure if I've ever had a creepier moment than looking up at the window and seeing someone on the other side. Yeah. Oh my gosh. About 8 years ago, I was talking about taking my sister's boyfriend home after we all gone out to see a movie. It was really late, around 1 a.m. on a dark country road. I was starting to get really sleepy, feeling drowsy when I saw a black hooded figure walking across the road. I was on, but saw him too late. I was going to run it over, and almost like it was made of smoke, disappeared. I was like, man, I'm starting to hallucinate because I'm sleepy. Then my sister's boyfriend was like, whoa, what was that? I instantly felt the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. Yeah, he saw the exact same followed me out right on my heels and across the parking lot. As I walked to my car, I tried calling my family members on my cell. By the time my mother picked up, everyone was at work and couldn't answer immediately. I had made it to the car. I turned around and the guy was just a few cars away, facing me and doing a bad job acting casual. Just standing in a parking lot with my hands in my pockets, staring at the sky. That's how he looked. I calmly but loudly told my mom that I was fine, but there was a man following me across Chick-fil-A's parking lot, and he's wearing... I say this loud enough so the dude can hear it. He bolts away from me, gets in a car a couple rows over, and peels out. I'm just glad he was so awful at being subtle. Dude, that could really have ended bad. That guy had no good intentions at all. People have to realize that. I mean, unfortunately, when people are doing that, very few people have good intentions, especially if there's no reason for them to be following you, like you've got a flat tire, or you are being stalked by somebody else, or, you dropped something. There are legitimate reasons, but this guy, you have to follow your instinct. Growing up in the city, I lived in a huge Halloween cornfield attraction with several haunted houses. It was always crazy busy and crowded. When I was 12 years old, a group of my friends made a plan to go one night. My parents were pretty strict and always anxious about me going anywhere. They said I absolutely could not go unless the group was accompanied by parents. rescue diver. My job involved looking for missing persons in the sea or river. My first recovery was my scariest one. If you don't know what happens to human bodies after prolonged marine exposure, trust me, don't look it up. In case the 30-year-old woman had been missing, in this case, the 30-year-old woman had been missing for 3 days. At this point, we were just looking for evidence she might have been in a cove underwater cave system, mostly looking for personal items. My diving buddy and I were looking at a rock formation when we found a watch. We set a marker float. I was busy writing down the location and time when my buddy pegged the watch when I felt something brush my shoulder. I turned around to see a white, cut, and partially eaten, decomposed hand touch my shoulder. I quickly recoiled and watched in horror. The body bobbed in and out of dark crevice under a rock formation. I'm not going to go into details as how she looked to spare you. Turns out she decided to end her life. She was a suspected sex trafficking victim and had slit her wrist, oh my gosh, before jumping in the sea. That's sad. It happened when I was 4. There was this old man who always brought a small rope with him and a teenage boy who looked huge and physically strong. They often knocked on doors asking for money. Then one time they knocked on the door and I opened it. They didn't even let me open the door fully. They pushed the door so hard I fell to the ground. My guess is they thought I was alone. They tried to grab me, but luckily my parents were home and they came out. They got a little defensive and still didn't want to leave the house without getting any money. My father actually gave them some money to these crazy people. Thankfully they left. After a week we heard the news that a kid my age was strangled to death in our neighborhood by an old man at the house was robbed after. From that day on, I never opened the door for a stranger again until I became an adult. Even then, don't open the door for a strange person that is not supposed to be at your house. Like if you're expecting Amazon and they need a PIN number, or if you're expecting the electrician. But if you're not expecting somebody and somebody comes knocking, I'm always like, what do you want? I can't help you. I was about 20 years old and still lived with my parents and younger siblings. I'm watching TV with my sister, 16, came in and ripped the remote from sister shaking the doorknob and ordered me to open the door so she could kill me. Okay. I stayed in front of the door. So, I guess she was too angry and eventually walked away. Obviously, I didn't leave my room until my parents got back. My parents brushed me off. I had turned that interaction over and over in my head for weeks. How could I have done things differently? There's no de-escalating with her. If she's going to rage, she's going to rage. That much has not changed as she's becoming an adult. But anyway, a few weeks, months, I can't remember later, the same thing happened again. She takes the remote, changes the channel, leaves the room, and comes back and forth, the whole thing. Steak knife and all. But this time, instead of a dash to my room, I took off to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest cleaver out of this knife block. The one that was always super sharp because nobody used it but my dad. She tore after me, but stopped when I turned around to the blade 3 times the size of hers. With the same fire in her eyes, she demanded I put it down. I said no. She repeated herself and I shouted, "Come at me," while brandishing the cleaver. After staring at each other's eyes for a minute, she turned around and walked out of the kitchen back to her room. She was oddly cool and calm. I don't remember if she put the knife on the table as she walked past or not. But I kept the cleaver on me as I kept watching TV. I don't remember if my parents commented on the cleaver when they came back or if I put it away. When I heard them come into the doorway, but she never attacked me with the knife again. Keywords being a knife. It wasn't just because of this incident, but how my sister was in general. But I was diagnosed with CPTSD from my dealings with her. Wow, she must have been horrible. I mean, that's pretty bad because every sibling fights, but to have PTSD from a sibling is pretty intense. So, some of my family is still trying to tell me we need to stop acting like children and put the effort to have a good relationship. But they've never been threatened to attack with a steak knife over changing a channel. So, lucky for me and not so lucky for them, some of my family has seen her true colors and are on my side. That's a thing. You cannot pick your siblings. And it's kind of like, in a way, you see this as a story where it's just a case of sibling rivalry, but that doesn't mean your sibling's not going to kill you. It doesn't mean you haven't been left how many people killed her family members, so there was something in her, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. We were on vacation on Lake Tahoe, a long, short story. Down a winding road, you're led to the lake, and the distance we see the same tree we saw our dad with in pictures during our childhood. We start running towards it. Me, my older and younger brother, my sister, and my cousin were all there, but my cousin and sister stayed behind. My brother and I walked to the brink of it, and as you know, Lake Tahoe is one of the clearest lakes in the world. You can literally see the bottom, the twigs, roots, and everything. My younger brother watched us up on the huge, long, thick, rotting log. I asked my brother if I can jump off of it, and he says, maybe. He remembers the water at the bank didn't feel too cold. So he says, sure. I look at the bottom of the lake, count 1, 2, 3, hesitate, but jump in. I'm under for a moment, and it feels refreshingly cold. I swim to stay afloat, but all of a sudden I start sinking. I gasp and panic and scream my brother's name, the sheer panic in his eyes, wondering if he should jump in and risk both of us drowning. I swim over and grab onto the branches of the tree, trying to stay afloat. Everything numb. I'm in utter shock. He helps me climb up and get off. I'm shaking and freezing. My legs and some parts of my stomach are scratched, bleeding, and begin to bruise badly. I reach the bottom and fall, and debris on the bottom cut me on impact. Walking back This is almost 5 years ago. I moved into a new house in January. In July, I started to get sick. Early August, I couldn't stop coughing and barely function. The doctor said he thought it was pneumonia and gave me heavy-duty antibiotics. He told me if I got worse to go to the emergency room as there was a really, really bad strain going around. I spent two days sleeping in my reclining chair on the ground floor as I could not stop coughing. By the end of the second day, I was feeling very, very ill. I called an ambulance and they arrived. One of them commented that it smelled really gassy. I said I'd had the heater going for 2 days straight. They took me to the hospital. I sat there while they did tests, chest x-rays, etc. They couldn't see anything much, so they discharged me. I remember walking out feeling like I was being myself. I walked the 15-minute home. At 1 a.m. when I got home, I went upstairs and got in the shower. I had to sit down as I was wobbly and couldn't control my bladder, but ended up going to bed upstairs. Next day was a sunny day. I opened the house up and was cleaning in the kitchen. I caught a whiff of something. I called a plumber and they ended up finding a gas leak. When the connection into the house was installed, they used a water connection, not a gas connection. Over the past years, it was slowly working its way loose and was now almost fully open. That's scary. In the last 2 weeks, there has been 3 instances where people have died in their homes from a carbon monoxide or dioxide leak from gas. I mean, that's scary. It had been illegally installed in an inaccessible area of the kitchen, so it was seeping out, and the only reason the house didn't blow up. I know that if I had not gone to the hospital that night and slept upstairs after I got home, I'd be dead. I ended up having chemical pneumonia, and I have terrible scarring on my lungs. I'm grateful to the doctor for scaring the crap out of me about how bad the pneumonia strain was, because I know I was only hours from dying. My just under 2-year-old son fell down in the kitchen. He had just started talking 5 minutes before he fell. He said, "I hurt." He fell over. We thought he was being silly. He said 2 to 4 more times. Finally, my wife took him to the kitchen to have a popsicle. I don't know, it was like 8 a.m., but whatever. She stood him up and he literally fell over. Then he tried to talk, but was baby talk and gibberish. We rushed him to the pediatrician. As we were waiting, I noticed that one side of his face was drooping. I said, "Looks like a stroke." The pediatrician who showed us up at some point said, "No way, highly unlikely for a 1-year-old." They ran tests for what seemed like days, but it was probably more like 10 minutes. I kept saying his left arm is drooping now and his face is fully stroked out. Finally, my wife stood up with him in her arms and yelled, "Screw this, I'm driving him to the children's hospital." The pediatrician kept telling us to go to a different hospital because he had admitting permission or whatever. They also tried to get us to take an ambulance, but I said it would take 15 minutes. We ran out, buckled him into the seat, and drove like a race car to the children's. They took him in, and he was immediately 40 doctors in the room. They all ran all kinds of tests. In seconds, guess what? My child had a stroke. He was having a hemorrhagic stroke from a burst capillary in his brainstem. Oh my god, he was dying, like for real dying. If we had stayed at the pediatrician's, he would have died. It was terrible. was 16, I ran away. Due to my mother being an alcoholic, she was laying into me with words really hard. One night, I decided to stay with my aunt and uncle for 3 days, until things calmed down before I went back home. When they dropped me off, I knew she was going to be mad because I now have embarrassed her in front of people for spilling our dirty laundry. When I walked in the front door, I was greeted with an angry face and an angry tone to match. Your drawers have been sitting here. Get your effing ass down the stairs and start with the cat box. Mind you, I didn't shower in 3 days because I was a depressive mess. I know, gross, but so I replied calmly as I'm heading for the stairs to my upstairs bathroom. I haven't showered. I'll do it after my shower. Wrong answer. You'll get in here and do it now. Who do you think you're talking to? After I take a shower, I can still hear her feet pounding on the kitchen floor, running towards me. She's screaming at me, and I booked it to my bathroom and locked it shut. She had gotten up the stairs so fast I didn't have time to get a good grip on the doorknob. She was pounding on the doorknob like a crazy person, shaking. I'm shaking, I'm crying, I'm terrified. She's shaking and beating the door so hard it cracks. The door comes flying off the hinges. She grabs me by the hair, dragging me out into the hall. What did you say, huh? What did you say, bitch? She yells. What? She picks me up, still by the hair, and throws me onto my back and onto the ground. Before I could react, she sits on me. Her weight is crushing my lungs. I'm trying to fight, then she takes her forearm and pushes it into my throat. I'm screaming and uncontrollably begging her to stop. You are nothing. I'm in charge. I'm the parent. I own you. Proceeding to put her full weight on me and dig deeper into the throat, freeze, and I go numb. I'm going to die, I thought over and over. Please, please, someone help me. I don't want to die. I remember thinking that over and over in my head. What felt like hours were only minutes, but I thought I was going to die. The only time I ever felt like I was actually going to die. Now mind you, this is my mom who was killing me. She finally got off me, and before I know anything else I could breathe, felt like I instantly could. Thank you, adrenaline shot up and pushed her hard. She slipped down a few stairs, catching herself completely, and called the police. After their investigation, partnered with DCF after telling them what happened. What's been happened, they labeled me as an out-of-control teenager, and I was put on probation for a year. On top of being grounded for a year, no electronics, no outside, no friends. And a part of me died that day because not only was I completely terrified of dying, but also terrified from the fact I would live in fear for 15 more years, even after moving out at 18. Last year, and this have been healing from it and plenty of other trauma, but it was the scariest moment of my life. That is a very sad case of where DCF completely failed this young person. Disgusting. I started dating someone I met online. We moved in together. Like I said before, people don't instantly show their true colors. He gradually got nastier and more abusive. It started with arguments when he broke my glasses and cut phone lines so I couldn't leave. Stole my credit cards, got me fired from a job by terrorizing my employer. When I broke it off and moved was a bus driver. I was taking my break, reading a newspaper parked at an angle in the bus loop. My doors were open to allow passengers to board. Dude with two young, energetic kids, get on. He looks like he's not coping well. After 5 minutes, I fold up my newspaper, I start the engine, close the doors, take off the parking brake, and put it in gear. I look in my mirror to make sure the spazzy kids are sitting down. One kid is missing. I ask the guy where his kid is. He starts frantically looking around the bus. I put the brake back on and open my window to duck outside. I look down towards my outward turned tire and see the kid. He's sitting in front of my tire with his legs spread open, picking at the treads. I was 11 or 12. I was walking down the street, maybe 2 blocks from my house. I lived in a town in the hills just outside of a city that had a lot of gang-related violence. My town was maybe 15 minutes away from gang territory. As I'm walking next to an 8 to 10 foot retaining wall that held up someone's front yard and house foundation, I hear a loud shout up, "F you, mother ever." As I look back, I see the barrel of a rifle sticking out of a car window. This car is driving towards me. I freeze. I could not run or anything. I just stood there knowing I'm about to die. I hear 2 soft bursts and the car drives off. I'm alive, shaking. Then after a few seconds, I look at the wall next to me and I see 2 places with the paintball splattered on the wall. Yes, I was shot at with paintballs, but for those few seconds I thought I was going to die. Yeah, that's terrible. When I worked fast food in a rough neighborhood, I got to be friends with some of the homeless folks who stayed around there. Especially this nice older couple, a man who lost everything during a mental breakdown, and his tiny, delicate little wife. I was overjoyed when I ran into them in a grocery store and found out the government had gotten them in a tiny apartment off the streets. That they'd been on the waiting list for years before making it to the top and getting help. A few months later, I run into the man, alone and looking sad. Turns out some teens had pulled that paintball gun prank on him and his wife, which put her into the mental hospital for a bit. She really wasn't well enough for that sort of shock and terror. Oh my gosh. And thanks to the government assistance rules, and she was officially living in the mental hospital for a few weeks. Her husband no longer qualified for his own apartment. They kick him back out onto the streets, and when she finally recovered enough to get out of the hospital, she got to join him on the streets. Back to the bottom of the way. That's not fair. That's terrible. Back in June 2019, my mom's brother unfortunately drowned trying to save his daughter. It was a terrible accident and easily one of the most scariest and unexpected events in my life. It took the rescuers 3 days to find him. This event left my whole family in shock, and I can't believe it's been 3 years since the incident. I wasn't there at the scene when this happened, and I never had the guts to ask my mom about the details. I went through a shooting in college. I can't even imagine. Permanently changed how I saw my country, many of the things that took place there, and how fragile life can be. I was a student at Virginia Tech in 2007 when the shooting happened. I was never in any danger and was several buildings away when it happened. I didn't personally know anyone who died, although one person was in a class with me. Even though I wasn't personally involved, the shooting left a lasting impression on me. I'm so sorry. When I was in high school, a kid in my grade stole a gun from his neighbor's house and texted a friend that he would shoot up our school. this was a beach at midday with people all around, which even made it more surreal. But sometimes that makes it more dangerous because people don't think anything's gonna happen. Same thing happened to me at a fun fair. When I hid, he went looking for me. I saw him again later, just pointed my phone at him like I was recording. Thanks, Mom, for teaching me that. He just walked away and I never saw him again. You need to actually record just in case. I live outside the city area. There are lots of trees and bushes near my home. One day I was doing some work a little bit away from my house when I saw a wasp that flew by me. I didn't pay much attention. After a little while, there were like 20 of them around me. They start attacking. I ran and they chased. I got stung 8 times before they stopped. I worked in a hospital in a semi-rural South African back in a part of the days. Problems in the lab meant I needed to go into work around midnight. Approaching Main Road in the township, quote-unquote, where the hospital located, there was a roadblock. A dozen soldiers flagging down cars, all armed with automatic rifles and very obviously staggeringly drunk. Great. Soldiers that are drunk with rifles, that's not good. They were obviously not expecting to see a white face, but for some reason I must have seemed like a threat as I wound down the window to talk. 2 rifle barrels were thrust into the car, pointing at my face. The leader was almost incoherently drunk, and I could hardly understand his lurid words and shouting. I tried to stay calm, be polite, not provoke. I had my hospital ID badge on the dashboard, managed to persuade him he needed to pick it up and look at it. I had my hands up and wasn't going to twitch unless told to. It was all very tense until one of his colleagues came over, possibly a little more sober, looked at the ID and started shouting, "Doctor, doctor." And it all sort of de-escalated and I was allowed on my way. I'm not a doctor. The ID badge incorrectly put the title before my name and I was waiting for the correct badge to arrive. But I feel that mistake may have saved my life that night. I would say absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Here is the last one. When I was 19, I was hunting with my father. We split